Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again. Today we're back with a bit of a different kind of video. So we're doing it live, but I do have a little short presentation here about what is a gaming publisher and how that relates to all the stuff going on with the recent events in Marvel Snap. So shout out to Lloyd in chat, who I believe was the one who asked me about this. He was like, hey, what does a publisher really do? I don't know a whole lot about that. And I was like, I don't know a lot about it either. So I did a little bit of research, did a little digging, found some interesting information, and I'm going to share all of that with you today. So let's dive into what a gaming publisher actually does. So, purpose of a gaming publisher. Originally, publishers were super focused on physical product distribution. If you grew up in the early 2000s, you remember the time when games were mainly something you went to a brick and mortar store to pick up and purchase before the takeover of the digital world. So a big part of what publishers did was being responsible for physical distribution and getting that distribution to the stores. Another thing that publishers do is they provide income to the developers during a game's creation period in order to fund it. Games are never really a sure thing, and developers have to make ends meet, so publishers step in to give them that consistent income so they have the time and resources they need in order to create the games that we all end up enjoying. They also handle product awareness via marketing campaigns. You want someone to play your game, you need them to know it exists and be excited about it, and that's where marketing comes in. And then they can also handle post-launch and customer support. This one can vary a little bit depending on the game. Some get more post-launch than others. Sometimes that's more on the developer than the publisher and vice versa, but it's something that the publisher can be responsible for. Then we have the evolution of publishing. So how has publishing changed over time? As physical sales have declined in favor of digital, the role of publishers has changed quite a bit. Marketing and funding the games are now much more of the main focus compared to the physical distribution we just talked about. And with less physical distribution needed, that also opened the door for self-publishing to become a significantly more viable option in the publishing space. Before, if you were, a small game developer and you wanted to make a game, it was still really, really important for you to get a publisher because it just wasn't very feasible for you to get your product out there. And when getting games off shelves was the main way people bought games, that kind of could make or break the chance of your game actually finding success. Nowadays, that's really not as much of a concern at all. Here we can see the number of games released on Steam worldwide in the period from 2004 to 2024, so 20 years. This is a pretty crazy graph, honestly, and I think it does a good job of helping visualize just how big the shift from physical to digital was. Obviously, like PC gaming got bigger too, but I think this really shows from 2004 to 2013, most of these games were being published and sold in physical copies. And then 2014 is really when it started to see that rise of digital in the PS4, Xbox One era. And it just has skyrocketed since then. Another really interesting part about this graph is if you look very recently here, the jump from 2023 to 2024, that's massive. Going from 11,583 to 15,422. That's such a huge increase. And I think we're only going to see that number continue to go up over time. And a huge part of that is because it is easier for smaller teams or even just a single person to publish their own game now. And so the rise of self-publishing. As the technology has evolved and become more accessible, solo and small game dev teams have increased significantly. You've probably noticed this if you've been around in the gaming space at all. You've probably noticed the rise of indies becoming this niche thing that not a lot of people know about. Indies are some of the most successful games in gaming right now. It's kind of crazy how much that has changed over time. I always think back to when Minecraft was kind of the one of the main early indies that blew up, and it was a small dev project, and now it's one of the most played games in the world. This results in more indie games being made and self-published than ever before. and that's a trend I think we're going to see continue over time. Self-publishing is not all upside, though. It can lead to greater risk. It can also lead to greater profits, but with that potential for profit comes greater risk. Because if you don't have a publisher, well, you might not have that consistent income coming in while you're working on your game, especially if it's more of a passion project you're doing on the side as opposed to like a full-time career. So there is, risk, but there is also reward that can come with that risk. And this is another graph that really surprised me. This shows the number of indie games specifically released on Steam from 2006 to 2024. And again, this kind of mimics the graph we saw earlier, but it is just very wild to see how starting in 2014, there was a massive jump up, and it has just accelerated pretty quickly over time. I mean, rapid growth from 2014 to 2018 stayed relatively consistent. Little bit up, little bit down from 2018 to 2023. But again, we saw a pretty big jump from 2023 to 2024. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see similar trends over the next few years. Another thing that I think is really interesting that is a relatively newer phenomenon that not a lot of people have talked about is the rise of content creator publishers. So the change in the publishing landscape has opened up a new opportunity for content creators specifically. There are a fairly large or maybe medium-sized number of creators that have started to get involved with game publishing. And this is super interesting because if you think about the purpose of a publisher and what publishers do, creators actually, at least if they're fairly large, can accomplish a lot of the stuff that game devs are looking for from a publisher. They have knowledge of the audience. They can provide the financial resources to fund the game, and probably most importantly, the marketing. Marketing is changing very rapidly. As someone who does content creation, it's been really interesting to see a bit of the other side of that, and how these different ad agencies are trying to figure out the best way to do marketing stuff, because for so long, they didn't have to reinvent the wheel on marketing. You just ran TV ads, you ran newspaper ads. It was kind of simple. But as you've probably noticed, all that stuff has started to change a bit with the rise of the amount of content creators out there and the amount of people who watch them. So this is a huge part of the marketing. If you have a creator you really like and they end up marketing a game, that is a good way to sell the game, especially if they know it is something that's going to be appealing to their audience. And they can give you that kind of that sense of credibility, like you trust this person's opinion because it lines up with your own opinions or views. So that is a huge potential. It's something we saw some pretty big examples of last year, which we can see here. The first of which, probably the biggest one, was Animal Well from Big Mode by Donkey. This one was kind of funny because a lot of people gave him a lot of crap when he announced that he was moving into video game publishing. A lot of people were like, well, you see, this silly content creator, he has no idea what actually goes into making a game. It's going to flop terribly. And then you go and you look at it, and Animal Well was one of the best games last year. It was one of my favorite games last year. One of the best puzzle-based Metroidvanias I think I've ever played. Awesome game. And I think that really showed that if you are passionate about the medium and you have a good understanding of it, there is huge potential in being able to use your resources and your audience in order to help market a good game. And there's some other examples here too. Get to Work from Isto and in partnership with Atrioc. I played that one on stream in December. I really love that game. That one is more of a rage game, like Only Up, but it was just a really fun and satisfying game. And then Rivals of Aether 2. This one is kind of like a Smash Bros. Like game. This is the only one on this list I haven't played personally, but I've heard good things about it from Off-Brand Games, which is done by Ludwig. So all really good examples of games that were well-made games that were effectively funded by these various content creators and their companies they made to help do this, and were marketed by them as well. And it worked out really well. And I think it worked out better this way than if they may have gone through traditional publishing means. So I think that's really interesting to see, and something that is worth keeping an eye out for into the future, because I could see more of this happening. Not every creator-published game is going to be a banger, but so far it has been a pretty promising development in the space. And on the flip side of that coin, large publishers are struggling to adapt a bit. The price of making AAA games has gone up significantly, and this creates a much bigger risk of failure. Concord, great example of this recently, it failed so hard, it made Sony reconsider many of their other upcoming live service games. If you don't know about this, basically, Sony had a lot of stuff in the pipeline planned for live service games. Live service was having this kind of gold rush. Everyone saw all the dollar signs and wanted to make all these live service games to make all this money. But it turns out when every game is a live service game, it becomes significantly harder to get enough people to make those games a success, because live service games demand a good amount of your time or money or both. And so only so many of them can exist at a time. And Concord was a landmark failure of just kind of failing to read the market and understand that. And it's having pretty big ripple effects as a result of its failure. Because now Sony's reconsidering a bunch of their live service stuff because they don't want to have another Concord. They spent millions and millions of dollars on making Concord for the Steam player count of that game to be like 200 people or something. It was impressive how hard it failed. And that cost them tons of money, and unfortunately that also cost a lot of people their jobs. The rise of self-publishing has significantly reduced the need for large publishers as well. So before, these large publishers, you kind of had to find one to work with. The ball was in their court. They had the benefit. But now with the rise of self-publishing, a bunch of these smaller, very talented devs, or even some people in the AAA industry, are deciding to leave that behind and go pursue their own passions without the need for these large corporate publisher overlords. So it's really quite a fascinating time to see how all this is developing. This is something that really stuck out to me. This was really surprising for me to see. So this is the performance of indie games on Steam in 2024. This comes from Video Game Insights. They have some interesting statistics over there, but we can see the number of games released. There are way more indie games released than AAA, and not every indie game is a success. Most aren't. Most aren't. Even though it's a great time for indies, one of the double edges to that sword is the fact that there are so many people trying to do this. It can be harder to stand out. It can be harder to get found, which ties into why the marketing aspect of a publisher can be so important, because probably more important than ever to actually get your product to stand out, get eyes on your product, get people aware of it, because the more there are, the harder it is to do that. So wasn't super surprised by the number of games released with indies being just so much more than AAA, and even AA, because those games require just significantly more investment and funding. Where it gets really interesting, though, to me, units sold. So units sold, we have indies representing 58%, and double and AAA representing 42%. This isn't quite as crazy, because when indies are just such a overwhelming population of the market, it makes sense just by, the law of large numbers that they're going to sell more, right? Just because they're selling more doesn't mean they're necessarily making more money. Indies are often cheaper, and whatnot. So it's one of those things where, yeah, this makes sense. It's still a little surprising to see. But the really surprising part of this to me was looking at the full game revenue compared between indies and double and AAA. Indies are really close to eclipsing double and AAA revenue, which is kind of crazy to me. Because like I said, indies are generally cheaper, AA, AAA more expensive. Double and AAA often have additional streams to monetize their games. Not all, but I think it's something that's much more common in double and AAA games compared to indie games. You'll have a battle pass, you'll have an expansion, you'll have microtransactions. Those are just things you see more commonly in those larger games because those games required larger investments. And if you look at the little graph down below, the rise was massive compared to 2023 before it. It's like those other charts we saw where there was a huge jump. From 2018, it rose from 24% to 31%. Then from 31 to 48, that is a huge jump. So it is possible that 2025 could be the first year, I think, ever that we see, at least on Steam, indies end up making more money than Double and AAA combined, which would be really, really crazy. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, the whole big AAA publishers are just having a harder time right now. Sony's reevaluating things after the failure of Concord. If you've kept up with like Ubisoft at all, Ubisoft was once one of the biggest publishers out there. They have all these iconic series under their belt, and now they're really struggling. And there are even rumors of a potential sell-off because they are just not adapting to the new climate well, which is it's kind of crazy if you went and told someone about this 5 or 10 years ago. The state of the industry now compared to what it was then, I don't think a lot of people would believe you. That's just how much it has changed. So let's get back to the topic at hand, though. How does all of this relate to Marvel Snap and Second Dinner and Nuverse and the ban and all the stuff that happened recently? So we got to ask ourselves some questions here that I'm sure a lot of people don't know the answer to. What does Nuverse do for Second Dinner? What is the relationship with that publisher? There are a few different things. Advertising. They run the online web store. They run the content creator program as well as in-game events. They run the content creator program as well as events like the Creator Clash, and as well as in-game events. And then they also are responsible for the community Discord. Advertising. Advertising is probably the biggest thing that Nuverse does. From what I can tell from my experience with my limited interactions with them, advertising does seem to be the biggest thing Nuverse has been doing for Second Dinner. A big example of this was sponsorship, sponsoring different people to play Marvel Snap. You might remember when Marvel Snap originally launched on PC, or when Deadpool's Diner came out, you saw some really, really large creators promoting this game. As far as I understand, that is all through Nuverse. They are the ones who manage those contracts. As someone who did get sponsored to promote Marvel Snap when the PC launch came out, that was also through Nuverse as well. They promote the game by running ads too, like on YouTube and stuff. If you've ever seen the Ben Brode ad about what if you couldn't buy all the cards when you start a new card game, that ad I think is being run by Nuverse, as well as in-person advertising stuff. Like they had the really huge in-person Devil Dino at Gamescom when they did PC release. They have the PAX promotional stuff, which was pretty interesting, and like the giveaways and cosmetics we saw with that. They also have the creator giveaways. Not all creators who are giving stuff away are sponsored by Nuverse, but some of it is, especially if you've seen those giveaways for like the premium mystery variants, occasional season pass stuff. That is something Nuverse helps us out with. And then Twitch drops, ? I don't know this 100% for sure. I couldn't find any concrete information on whether that was a Second Dinner or a Nuverse thing, but I'm inclined to believe that was a Nuverse thing as well, given all the other stuff they handle here. The web store. The web store is also a big part of what they do. It gets Second Dinner the largest cut of a sale. Steam, iOS, and Google Play all take roughly a 30% cut. That's pretty big. That's a large chunk of change. Now, we don't know if Nuverse is taking a cut off the web store. I imagine they are, but there's no information about that. So all we know for sure is that the developers have communicated that that's where they get the largest sum of what you are paying directly to them rather than the storefronts. It also gives bonus rewards for players because they are trying to incentivize giving you a reason to go to the web store to get them the most chunk of the money. The weekly Galactus spin is an example of this as well. That's another thing that's trying to drive foot traffic to the web store. And their referral rewards. They've done this occasionally. I don't think they've been the most popular things around, but that is another thing that falls under Nuverse's responsibility with the web store. Creator program. Yeah, this is a thing I'm a part of. Provides creators with a place to give feedback, early access to patch notes, though that is now a lot more limited than it used to be. And 2,000 monthly Brode bucks. And it also runs Twitch event showcases like Conquerors and Creator Clash. That kind of falls under the advertising stuff, but right now it is very much unclear to me what is going to happen with the creator program in the future. Only time will tell. I hope it stays the way it is because I think it gives them some decent benefits for not a whole lot of cost, but since that was a Nuverse responsibility, that's who I'm signed a NDA under. I don't know what's going to happen with that with the change to a new publisher. And the community Discord. This one I don't have as much experience with because I really only am using the Discord for the creator perk stuff. I'm not really taking part in the larger community Discord outside of reading the occasional dev answers. But I do think a lot of people really enjoy the Discord and find some value in that in terms of just finding a place to talk with other people about this game that they enjoy. Probably the best part of the Discord, and this is, I think, more on the second dinner side than the Nuverse side, is the fact that we get a lot of developer questions and answers. I know that's the thing I like about it the most. There was also the Nitro promo they did. I'm pretty sure that is something that Nuverse facilitated. This is an old promo, so it's not something currently ongoing, but that's just like another example of something Nuverse did for advertising using Discord as a partner. And they also manage in-game events. So we haven't gotten a ton of these over time, especially in the last few months, but they pop up once in a blue moon. The most recent example of this was the Collector's Chest event with that Black Panther variant, but they've also done stuff in the past. If you were around towards the beginning of the game's launch, you might remember the Vibranium Forge. There have been others throughout the years, but this has been a relatively smaller thing, but kind of a cool thing nonetheless. I don't know if they're responsible for stuff like the Null and X23 variant event thing that's going on. That one wasn't super clear to me, but I know at least with these ones here, that does seem to be Nuverse based. All right, enough about Nuverse. What about Marvel Snap's new publisher, Skystone Games? So I did a little bit of research on them, and there really isn't a whole lot of information out there about them, but I think I gathered most of the good stuff here, so let's talk about it. Skystone Games is focused on publishing indie games, and they mostly publish single-player / co-op games. Second Dinner will also be taking many of Nuverse's previous responsibilities in-house via new hires. I think that's a really, really important thing to take away from this. We'll talk about it more as we go through the slides, but even though they did get a new publisher, I don't think we're going to be seeing this new publisher play as large of a role as Nuverse did, because Nuverse was just a much bigger publisher who also had more experience with this specific type of game, namely like mobile live service stuff. If you look at Skystone Games' portfolio, which we'll get to in a second, they do not do a lot of live service games. So who is Skystone? What is Skystone? They are led by a former Blizzard employee who worked on Diablo. They were funded by the venture capitalist firm Galaxy Interactive. They were founded in 2020. They have 8 employees, and it is a US-based backed company. So you do not have to worry about it getting shut down again due to ownership from a Chinese company, which is probably, I think, one of the larger things they wanted to accomplish with grabbing a new publisher. And here are the games. So I'm not going to super dive deep into these. Many of you probably haven't heard of these. I haven't heard of these either, except for Tyrant's Realm. That one actually came up recently. I saw a few different people playing it on YouTube. It looks fun. I might be picking it up actually to play for myself because it is a neat little mix of a Souls-like with a roguelike. But the one thing we're seeing in common here with these games is that they are largely either single-player games or like co-op games. We have a survival crafting zombie game, a Souls-like roguelike. We have a adventure indie strategy RPG. We have an action roguelike. We have a party co-op game, a tower defense game, strategy puzzle game, and then the last one, which isn't out yet, is a competitive FPS. So that could be the one game they have under their umbrella other than Snap that might have some similarities in terms of like live service type stuff. But generally, you can see from these games that Marvel Snap is a bit of an anomaly here in terms of the type of game that is going to be under them. It's not something they have a whole lot of experience with. They just work with very different and also much smaller generally games. Marvel Snap, I think, is massively more popular than anything on this list by a very significant margin. So a pretty big win for Skystone Games to get something like that under their umbrella. So what happens next? Honestly, it's hard to know anything for sure. This could play out a whole lot of different ways. Second Dinner could continue to maintain many or even all of the things Nuverse did in the past, or they could use this time to reevaluate some of those things and decide, hey, we want to do this differently, or we don't think this is worth doing. Which of those things will they choose to do, and what will they choose to do differently? I don't think there's any reasonable way of predicting that. I think that's just going to be something we have to wait and see about. But I do expect, like I said earlier, Second Dinner to be picking up the brunt of the workload as a publisher compared to Nuverse doing a lot of the stuff before. And as a result of that, I think they are going to be doing, I mean, they've even said this, actually, they're going to be hiring more people for more of these roles as they take more of this stuff in-house. The main things I think the new publisher is going to do is focus on advertising and maybe some of the payment processing stuff with the web store. But outside of that, I don't expect the new publisher will play a major role in Marvel Snap. I think we'll see more of Second Dinner taking a step up to do a lot of the things their publisher was doing previously, just in-house now. And also, since this is something a lot of people wonder about, to me it seems unlikely the new publisher would be the one to push for any major changes, be they monetization or otherwise. I think the reason they got a publisher like this is so that they could have, the most control over what they're doing. And I think that is how we're going to see things play out, for better or for worse. The new era of Marvel Snap. So, the ban in the news did bring back some old players and also brought in some new ones. That is probably the most positive thing that has come out of all of this. It's no secret, Snap was in a bit of a downswing before the ban happened, and this was caused largely by card acquisition issues. Not the only thing. I think there was a bit of competition and other games coming out and stuff that played a part there, as well as the game just generally getting older and not being the shiny new thing anymore and not having enough features that kept players super invested. But I think if you ask any Marvel Snap player, the biggest reason they may have stopped playing or play less, it's card acquisition. Card acquisition is the issue at the top of the chart there. Now, Second Dinner is trying to brand the post-Snap ban stuff as a new era, and this branding gives them a chance to rebuild player trust as well as interest in their game. The first step of this has been the large compensation package they did to the US players, as well as giving many players around the world a pretty big chunk of that as well, as a kind of welcome back thing. They branded it as, yeah, this is compensation, but we also want to, go the extra mile and make it a bit of a welcome back thing. If you're someone who has, stopped playing, or maybe, you've been on the fence a bit, well, this can help reinvigorate your interest in Snap a bit. We've also seen them change the daily Galactus spin too, which has been something that a lot of people have found to be a really positive thing. Before, the odds were really bad. A lot of the times you got boosters. It didn't feel very good. Now, the worst thing you're getting is 100 credits, which is significantly better than it was last time. And you have much better odds at actually getting something cool that you want and will use. So this is the kind of first steps we're seeing with their whole new era branding going on here. And here I have some statistics. I know there are definitely going to be people who say, well, it's not really fair to take this mobile game and look at Steam statistics or Twitch statistics because that doesn't paint the full picture. And honestly, I agree with you. I do not think these numbers alone are going to paint enough of a full picture to get an accurate representation of the whole larger player base. And fortunately, those are numbers that Second Dinner has and we do not. There's not really a great way for us to look at the larger mobile population because this is a mobile game. And it's no secret that the people who play it on Steam are definitely in the minority. But that doesn't mean there can't be some useful information extrapolated from here to show that bit of a decline I was talking about earlier. I mean, if we just look at the numbers in Steam, it's gone down really significantly in the span of a year. Back in January of last year, Snap was having an average players of 5,100, and now in December and looks like most of January, it's down over 2,000 players. That is a huge, huge chunk, especially when in November there were 4,000 players. In October, there were 4,700. Like the fall has happened rather quickly. We even saw a little bit of a rise during the summer. August 2024 had more people playing than January or any of the other months before it, actually. So it's not like they can't have this like resurgence, but it feels like the fall off has happened rather quickly for these more invested Steam players. But the really interesting part, though, to me is the stats we have at the bottom here from the Twitch tracker. And again, I think that in general, Twitch viewership isn't the greatest tracker for the larger player base. But there's an exception to that. And I think this is the only thing that actually gives us a little read of the larger player base. This graph, you might notice, has a lot of spikes in it. Why are these spikes here? Well, the reason we see all these spikes is because of Twitch drops. Twitch drops are what massively spike up the viewership in Marvel Snap each month. They've been very consistent. We can see the first drop happening back in, I guess, like the late summer of 2023, and they've happened very consistently since then. And you can see that little spike in viewership every time. What you might notice, though, is that those spikes have been declining quite a bit, especially more so in the recent second half of 2024. So why does this matter? I think this matters because the Twitch drops are the one time where we have much more casual players who likely mainly play this game on mobile, who don't engage with YouTube, don't engage with Twitch, don't play the game on Steam. This is when we actually get those players onto the stats charts here. Because who doesn't love free stuff? A lot of people show up for the free stuff. That's why the viewership is so much larger. And I think it often shows people that Marvel Snap has a much larger player base than you might really realize just by like the seeing the content creation scene online. So this is the really interesting stats to me, is seeing the numbers falling off with Twitch drops, because that says to me, hey, this isn't just a feeling that's happening with the more engaged players who are, you know, watching videos, watching Twitch, playing on Steam. There's a trend here that is happening across even more of these casual players who maybe only show up to get their drops every month. They're not showing up as much either. And with the limited information we have, I think that does paint a pretty concerning picture, especially when you look at the average viewers. I mean, the average viewers on Twitch have fallen off a cliff. It's kind of crazy. So, back to the new era of Snap, though. They could throw Nuverse under the monetization bus. This provides them a fresh start. So what do I mean by this? Basically, I don't think Second Dinner is going to go out of their way to say, hey, Nuverse was the one who made us do all this stuff you guys didn't like. Now we have a new era and we can do all this stuff on our own. Look, everything I have seen from Second Dinner has led me to believe that, end of the day, they are the ones making these decisions on the pricing of their game, a bunch of the decisions. Like they're the ones calling the shots. Now, maybe some of those shots that they call are influenced by the fact that they're giving a cut to Nuverse. It doesn't mean something like that can't change. But how the average gamer views a publisher versus an indie developer, usually the publisher is the greedy Scrooge McDuck figure in the trench coat that wants to squeeze all the money out of the poor, humble indie developer. That's just how a lot of people view it, because a lot of people don't know what gaming publishers are. They think of them as this nameless, faceless corporation that just wants to extract as much money as possible. And I don't think that's actually the reality in a lot of situations, but it's really easy for them to lean into that when that's kind of the default thought process for a lot of people. Indie good, publisher bad. It's easy to be like, all right, well, maybe the publisher wasn't causing the issues here, but if a lot of people are already going to think that, us having a fresh start and making things better, it's just really easy to kind of throw the publisher under the bus, like they were the one causing all these problems, and the indie company gets back to being like the golden child or the good guys again. And I think that is a very smart marketing strategy, and I would not be surprised if that's what we see them do. I mean, I think we already have seen them start to do that. And that doesn't mean they're going to go out of their way to trash Nuverse specifically. It's just like they just lean into this a little bit, which I think that's what they're doing. I think that's why they gave us the whole new era branding, and some of the other stuff they've done. Like it just makes sense, and it's probably good marketing. But Snap really needs a new way to reinvigorate the player base. And I hate to say it, draft enjoyers, it's not going to be draft mode. I won't get super into that in this presentation, but Benbro did have an interview recently where he was asked about draft mode, and well, let's just say it sounds like draft mode is a very large if, not a guaranteed when. But even if it was a when, I don't think that's the type of thing that Snap needs to really reinvigorate the player base. I think what Snap needs to do is they need to really embrace the casual nature of Snap. Snap made a game that they made all these decisions to make it more casual friendly, but they also pumped up the FOMO so much that it felt a bit anti-casual in that way in terms of what the game demands from you. Whether it's like having to log in 3 times a day to get the maximum amount of free stuff, or the fact that you can't really skip a day without missing out on quests, unlike other card games. Like, the list goes on. I've talked about that in other videos and stuff, but I think what Pokemon Pocket has showed me, and that game is far from flawless, but Pokemon Pocket to me really nailed what a casual card game should be, and I don't feel as much FOMO from it. I don't feel as much like pressure to need to keep up, especially if I am not super into like the gameplay at the moment. Like that stuff I think Snap has done poorly with, and they really need to find a way to re-embrace the casual nature of the game. And you don't need to get rid of the FOMO. I get it. FOMO is effective. It sells. It makes money. It works in the mobile industry. They're never going to fully get rid of it. But I do think they need to dial it down a bit, because I do think a lot of this FOMO and this constant nature of always being on the treadmill is a big part of what's burning people out, aside from the card acquisition stuff. But at the end of the day, the new era of Marvel Snap will live or die by however they rework the economy later this year. Even with all the other stuff said and done and them trying new stuff, none of it will matter if the economy rework isn't good enough. That's really going to be, I think, the turning point. That's when Marvel Snap either turns it around, and I think we'll start seeing, more players come back, more growth in the game, or it'll go the other way and more people will leave. It's really one or the other. I don't think there's going to be a middle road here. So here's hoping they get it right. And that takes a little bit longer for it to manifest in order for them to get it right. I'm okay with that because they really need to get it right. This is not something. One thing I hope they learned from the compensation was one of the Marvel Snap in the past, like with the Splitgate stuff or the Gambit bundle compensation, they kind of lowball you at first, and then the community gets mad, and then they're like, "All right, caught, you got us, guys. We'll reconsider. We're listening to your feedback. We're gonna make it better." And it's good that they reconsider and make it better. But it'd be better if we didn't have to go through this whole art of the deal with the initial lowball that annoys people to begin with. And they didn't do that with the compensation for the ban, because they knew they couldn't afford to do that. They knew if they lowballed the compensation for the ban, running it back with a better offer after, it wouldn't be good enough. And that is exactly how I feel about this economy rework. Getting it halfway there on the first rip, especially with how long it's taken for this to happen, it is not going to be good enough. So they need a home run. They need to smash it out of the park, and I hope they do. Because the game, I think, at least the online content creation space, the dedicated player space on Twitch, on YouTube, Discord, etc., I think that space really does live or die by how they handle this economy rework. So we'll see. We'll see sometime this year how that ends up going. And yeah, that is it for my little presentation on publishing in games and how all this stuff relates to Second Dinner's new publisher, etc. So thanks for watching it. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I guess we'll take them now.